Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Daily Fantasy Flex podcast, the NFL edition. I am your host, Bryan Mears. I am joined this week by Ian Hartitz and Peter Jennings, a.k.a. CSU Ram 88, and we are here to talk about the wild card weekend round for the NFL playoffs. It was an interesting Week 17 slate, a lot of different dynamics as far as motivations go, and we're going to hit on that just a little bit for the teams that we're looking at this week, but mostly we're going to dive into this four-game slate and talk about some of the best plays for this weekend. Again, I'm joined by Ian and Peter. Pete, how was your Week 17? Very weird slate, just with a massive 16-game slate and just all of the news.
Yeah, it ended up being slightly profitable. I had one really good team with Rivers and Keenan Allen and Amari Cooper running it back, so Amari Cooper almost got me. If just one more big play from him, potentially could have gotten even on Amari Cooper this year. But yeah, it was a good week. It's certainly an edge for paying attention, and yeah, excited for the playoff slate.
I feel like that was the worst possible thing, Ian. Pete ended on a good note with Amari Cooper, so now all offseason, Pete's just going to be thinking about that last week and what next year's going to bring for him.
I'm just happy he got one quality Cooper game on the main slate. It was just cruel to see that explosion happen on a Monday night. So at least he got to go out with a good one.
Yeah, I'm very skeptical. I'm going to be cautious with him next year.
For sure. Ian, how you doing, man? And one question we had talked about this off pod. We could talk about it now. You know, it was interesting because the only game that was like super interesting as far as both teams having to play for was the Panthers-Falcons. And you and I were talking earlier this morning, the Panthers just put up a complete dud. Were you surprised by that?
A little bit, but I feel like this Panthers team all year, really even, I don't know, these last 2 years has been so inconsistent on a week-to-week basis. And for whatever reason, that Falcons defense has really had Cam's number. I think we were saying it's been like 5 of the last 6 games against them. He's thrown for fewer than 200 yards. So a little bit surprised, but at the same time, I mean, they've obviously figured out a little bit how to neutralize that Panthers offense. So, I mean, when you're playing the same team twice a year for, again and again and again, I guess you do get more familiar with those divisional opponents in the second game.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, so let's dive into the slate a little bit. We have 4 games for Wild Card Weekend. I'll just quickly run those off, and then we'll dive into the actual players here. First one is, and I'm just going by live implied total. So the highest total game, 48.5, is Falcons at Rams. Looks like Rams are 6-point favorites as we're recording this on Tuesday night. At 48.5 total as well, we have Panthers in the Superdome going against New Orleans Saints. Saints are 6.5-point favorites. We have the Tennessee Titans going against the Kansas City Chiefs. That is a 44.5 total, and the Chiefs are currently 8-point favorites. And then sort of the ugly one of the week, it looks like, with a 39.5 total here is the Bills visiting the Jaguars. The Jaguars are 7.5-point favorites. Ian, you might run it through like what we know as far as injuries go as of Tuesday night. We had DeMarco Murray. He missed Week 17. Derrick Henry got all the touches in the backfield. Shady got injured in Week 17. What are sort of the big injuries that we need to keep our eye on, and what do we know right now?
Yeah, just a few injuries, nothing like what we were dealing with last week in that Week 17. But, yeah, based on some early week reports, starting with Shady, Adam Schefter said today that he will be a game-time decision for Sunday. So it's already going to be something with that sprained ankle is going to take him up right until game time. Even if he ends up playing, we got a report from Rap Sheet basically saying that he'll be limited and not 100%. So even if Shady's suiting up, I mean, expect to see at least some of Mike Tolbert and Marcus Murphy. DeMarco Murray, like you said, he came in this week not practicing. They've been pretty upfront with his injury and saying it's more of a pain tolerance thing. So I'm not sure if this is something that's really going to necessarily get better by Saturday into something that he can actually play through. So even if he ends up kind of suiting up, we're once again expecting Derrick Henry to have that featured role, but it could be a difference of, 97% snaps versus 80 or something. Moving on, we had a late scratch last week with Jonathan Stewart and his back issue. Rivera said that his back's already feeling better and they're expecting him to play Sunday. Even if he doesn't play, though, I mean, we saw McCaffrey only get 6 carries, so they're not going to pound McCaffrey into the line as an early down back, regardless of who else is active, so might not have as big of a role change as we would otherwise think. And last little update, Julio Jones and Devontae Freeman didn't practice today. It's normal with Julio. He's missed several Tuesday practices recent weeks. We have no reason to worry about him. But the Devontae Freeman thing's a little more iffy. It's a knee issue, and they actually used their new roster spot on a running back because they put their left guard on IR. So don't know a whole lot about that situation, but Devontae is definitely a guy to worry about because we've seen what Tevin can do with that featured role.
For sure. All right, let's talk about a little slate dynamics strategy. Pete, you're the company DGen of the group here. You play all of the NFL slates. We have some like 4-game slates with like the afternoon ones. This is obviously a little bit bigger than like the prime times, which are 2. But so this might just be more similar to the afternoon ones. Are you sort of treating it like the strategy that you employ? I know you've always talked about really getting up to roster the studs in smaller slates, but what sort of advice would you give on these smaller ones?
Yeah, I mean, I love the short slate, so there's a lot of opportunity in them. Obviously they've gotten a little more efficient over the years, but still opportunity. I think the biggest thing about this specific slate is taking advantage of late swap on both sites. You have a full day in between, obviously with the Saturday having 2 games, Sunday having 2 games. There's 2-game slates for both days as well, I believe. So on the 4-game slate, the main, I think you want to make sure you're ready to pivot. Obviously, we have the LaShawn McCoy news, and now with the Freeman news, that kind of makes things interesting at the running back position overall. So make sure you take advantage of those swaps against your opponents. You can do the same thing in tournaments. If you get off to a great start, you can play chalkier options. If you are in a hole, you definitely want to pivot to be contrarian to try to catch up. So that'd probably be the biggest dynamic on this slate that I'd be actively trying to take advantage of. And, it should be great. I'm excited. These next 2 weeks should be a great set of games, and playoff football is always awesome.
It certainly is. All right, well, let's get into our main parts of the show. We usually start talking about who we're expecting to be the projected chalk. And, again, this is Tuesday night, so I don't expect things to change that much. I mean, if we get shady news earlier, then that will obviously affect a little bit of the slate. But this isn't a huge, 16-game slate where we're waiting on a variety of teams' injuries. We sort of know what it's going to look like this weekend. So we'll have projected ownership up on the site tomorrow. But this is sort of a first glance at it. Pete, I'll kick right back to you. It seems like the chalk is going to be these stud running backs. We have Gurley, Kamara, Fournette, Kareem Hunt, who's had a bit of a resurgence a little bit lately, Mark Ingram. Are you expecting that to sort of the chalk roster construction to be paying up for these stud running backs?
I do. I think Gurley will end up being the chalk around the industry, and rightfully so. Falcons have given up the most receptions to running backs this year as well as last year. And if you look at Todd Gurley's performance this year, he didn't even get the rushing title. Really did a ton of damage in the receiving game, which sets up extremely well in DraftKings PPR. And even on FanDuel, I think it makes a lot of sense to try to jam him in. So he's clearly the number 1 overall projected player. I think the safety and the ceiling that he has, both floor and ceiling, are worth paying up for. So he'll end up being pretty chalky. I do think some of the other running backs will come in. We'll have to monitor this news. That would definitely change things around, especially on DraftKings where the pricing is really tight. It'd be nice to get a backup running back in there. I like Leonard Fournette quite a bit. We'll see if he ends up being chalk. Buffalo's been awful against the run. Really expect Jacksonville's defense to play well in this spot as well. So I think he's another really good option. But, yeah, all those guys are nice. Then you just have to look for value at receiver. And it gets pretty gross. You're looking at guys like Eric Decker on DraftKings. I think people will probably chase points with Albert Wilson, which I'd caution against because the dynamic is so different with all the, basically last week they had second-string players in. So people will see what he did in the last game and potentially not realize, Tyreek wasn't playing, Kelsey wasn't playing. So, there's cheap options that you have to look at receiver, and some of those guys might end up being chalk. But it's a tough week with how tight the pricing is and how much you want to jam in these running backs. I don't think there's a consensus chalk quarterback at all, though.
Yeah, no, that's definitely, I think, the most interesting position for sure. Ian, what are your thoughts on the chalk? This might be, fairly obvious that Todd Gurley and then these other high-priced guys are going to be the chalk, right?
Yeah, I think Pete made a good point though about Fournette. He's got a little bit of a price discount compared to the other guys. And I mean, I feel like for the last few weeks we've just been kind of worried about the Jaguars' kind of new look pass offense, and then maybe not ramming him as much with the playoffs already decided. But we don't have to worry about that anymore. I mean, it's their season. He's their guy. He's one of just 4 backs this year with 7 games with over 20 carries per game. So we know he can handle this load. And I mean, I think one big issue we have with him is kind of his alleged lack of a receiving role. But when he's been out there, he's been plenty involved. He's averaged 4 targets per game since week 8, which is more than guys like Kareem Hunt, Shady, and Ingram have. So really, he might not be the same caliber receiver, but he's at least getting the looks, which is kind of all we're concerned about. And then at quarterback, I agree, might not be a chalky option, but I do think Cam brings so much value with this rushing floor he's been displaying lately. 4 straight games with at least 11-plus carries. I mean, if you take away the guy's passing production this year, he would have been the RB32 in standard scoring. I mean, it's ridiculous how good that guy is with the ball in his hands. And, again, same thing with Fournette. I mean, we've seen the Panthers' offense really thrive when Cam is running the ball all the time. So, season on the line, I mean, I'd hope that we'd see more of that. But, obviously we'll see if the Panthers decide to go that direction.
Yeah, so I have a note on Cam here. So in the last 4 years, he's obviously played in the Superdome 4 times just because of the division rival. Let's see, his worst performance was this year, but he still exceeded salary-based expectations. So in his 4 trips, he has averaged 31.7 DraftKings points. He's averaged a 12.53 plus minus, and he's hit value all 4 times. Pete, what are your thoughts on Cam? And then thoughts on Jared Goff? I'm sort of keep on coming around to him. I know he's the most expensive quarterback, but it seems like he's in a really nice spot. And if you want to get that correlation with Todd Gurley, Jared Goff has been throwing touchdowns to Todd Gurley all year, so it seems like that's a nice pairing. What are your thoughts on the quarterback position?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jared Goff is the highest expectation running or quarterback. So I do like him. Just tough with especially in DraftKings, how tight the salary is. You'd like to get a little bit of savings, but the quarterbacks are bundled together. I think Alex Smith and Goff will probably be the heaviest owned. I'm not sure. It's going to be really tough to figure out. In terms of Cam, I mean, I think he's fine. Obviously, he's done well in New Orleans. Way different defense historically than what it is this year, and that's the challenge. The offense is kind of coming in sputtering as well. So that aspect makes me a little bit nervous. But, obviously for tournaments, I think he's a phenomenal play. I like stacking that game up. Michael Thomas will probably be pretty low owned given his expensive price tag. And that's certainly where you want to attack the Panthers is with the wide receivers. So I like Cam Newton stacks with like a Christian McCaffrey or maybe a Funchess. Have to monitor the Olsen thing. I know he came up lame the last game. I think he'll be fine, but a little concerned just about his foot and his explosiveness. So you can also just go Cam by himself, obviously, with the rushing upside. So for cash, I probably won't go there just because, you look at the team totals. They're on the road there, only 20.75 implied total right now. So I'm just a little concerned about the game flow there with Cam. But for tournaments, I think he makes a lot of sense, as does Drew Brees in that game.
Yeah, it's a tough slate. You talked about if you want to get up some of these high-priced running backs, the salaries are just tight, which that brings us into our tight end position. Let's talk about what we expect as far as ownership goes there. I mean, Pete, there's no way you can get some of these running backs and also afford Travis Kelce at 7-1. And then you're looking at the other, really solid options. You have Greg Olsen, who has seen a pretty high target share since he's returned the last couple of weeks with Cam. You have Delaney Walker at 4.7. But I mean, are people really going to do Austin Hooper at 2.9? What are your expectations as far as the tight end position goes? Because you probably want to pay down, but it's not exactly a great position this week.
Yeah, I mean, I like Austin Hooper for the price tag because I want the savings. He could fall into the end zone. I think he's fine. Charles Clay has a tough matchup against that defense, but he's going to get volume. You're right on Travis Kelce. I mean, we'd love to play someone like him, but no chance, at least in cash games, that you're going to be able to fit him with a couple of these running backs. He might become a little more viable if news breaks the right way for some of these backups. But tight end's a really tough position, and because of the nature of the slate, I'm going to be spending down, and my favorite really dirt cheap tight ends, Hooper. Ian, you have any other takes than that? Because I am struggling at the tight end position.
I think you said it, man. I mean, after Clay at 4K, it basically goes to Hooper at 2.9 is like the only viable option. I mean, we've seen Clay, like you said, he's got the targets recently, and I mean, Jaguars have been, at their worst, which still isn't that bad against tight ends this year. But yeah, I mean, I think all things considered, unless you're trying to pay up for Kelsey, I think Hooper's at a cheap option this week.
All right, so let's talk about some chalky fades and some leverage and pivot plays. I think maybe the most obvious thing to get sort of an advantage over the field might be to pay up for Kelsey at 7-1 on DK, because people are going to be taking these high-price running backs. But I'm curious, Pete, just as a thought exercise, of like the top running backs, you have Gurley 9.7, then you have Kamara, Hunt, and Fournette. Those are guys all 7K and above. You can even throw Mark Ingram in there. Which guy are you the most willing to fade?
I mean, in tournaments, I don't hate fading Gurley given the price discrepancy that you have. You can build some teams with more studs and opportunity. And if I'm fading Gurley, I'm probably going to someone like Robert Woods, who I like a lot in this spot. Trufant's not going to shadow, so I really like him just in general. You can go to any one of the passing game options for the Rams. Obviously, it's still concerning with Goff. He's probably going to throw to Gurley a good bit, but I do think that you can gain a lot of leverage against the field. In those lineups, I like the idea of going Julio Jones or Travis Kelce or Michael Thomas, paying up for a stud that will most likely be low-owned just because they're a possible fit with someone like Todd Gurley. So I don't hate that idea. Hunt, he's someone I'm probably not going to have a ton of exposure to because it's the first game here on Saturday. And that does make me just a little bit nervous as well, just because there could be some options to pivot to on Sunday. So he's probably the running back I'll have the least exposure to, and maybe that's reason to get on him. But, I really like Fournette. I really like Gurley. Gurley makes sense to me as a fade in tournaments in certain spots because he can make a totally different roster than what I think will be chalk. And, of course, I love Kamara. That's my guy. So, the troubling thing is Kamara is priced so much higher than Ingram, and I've been playing Kamara all year. I think Ingram's the better fantasy point per dollar play with the big discrepancy in tag.
Yeah, well, it depends on if you count the 3 punt returns that Kamara's going to have. I mean, the dude just scores fantasy points all over the place. Ian, what are your thoughts on like which guy you might want to fade? I actually like Kareem Hunt quite a bit just because I think that for some of the reasons that Pete mentioned, like he might be a little overlooked, but maybe not. I mean, he's facing Tennessee, so I don't know.
Yeah, I don't hate Kareem Hunt at all, especially, we've seen his usage just skyrocket basically once Matt Nagy took over their play calling. I'm looking a little bit further down the salary scale. Mentioned this briefly with Cam, but I'm not super sold on McCaffrey. It's been all season. If anything, his workload's gotten smaller as it's gone on. He has never become the 3-down back maybe people expected him to be with the 8th overall pick. Last week he played 85% of snaps with no Jay Stu, but like we said before, only 6 carries, and Cameron Artis-Payne still had 5. So, I mean, for him to be a higher price than Devontae Freeman, I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of more on Freeman just considering he has a higher rushing floor. He has a bigger red zone role. And, I mean, his receiving floor, I mean, this is all assuming he's healthy. We had this knee injury come up earlier, but his receiving floor isn't bad either. I mean, he literally had 11 targets last week and put together a 9.85-1 line. It's kind of – I mean, I'm not convinced that he's the receiving back over Coleman. It's kind of hit or miss a little bit. But, I mean, between those two, I don't think his receiving floor is that much lower than McCaffrey. And like we said, he's got everything else working for him. Quickly at receiver, kind of lower price options again. I'm more willing to take a shot on Ted Ginn over a guy like Mohamed Sanu and like Keelan Cole. With Sanu, I mean, it's been since 2014 since we've seen him have over 100 yards in a game. I think he fits their offense well, but his ceiling just really isn't that high in tournaments if we're looking to go that route. And then Keelan Cole, I'm not quite sure what the Jaguars are going to do this week if Marquise Lee ends up returning. That could have mentioned him in injuries earlier. But, I mean, they're going to have Allen Hurns, Marquise Lee, D.D. Westbrook, and Keelan Cole. Westbrook and Cole played equal snaps last week. They both moved around the field all year, so really a lot of uncertainty there. So, obviously Ted Ginn's a little bit of a boom or bust guy, but I mean, he's still gotten 5+ targets in 8 of 16 games, and he's had a top 3 rate in yards per target this season. So he definitely is more than capable of making big plays with those few targets he gets. And, like Pete said earlier, those Carolina cornerbacks are who we really want to attack on the outside. So if we can maybe get a little cheaper receiver that actually has that upside, that's who I would go for.
Yeah, Keelan Cole is an interesting guy. Of all wide receivers on this slate, he is fifth. Of all pass catchers, he's fifth with a nearly 25% market share of targets over the last month. So definitely an interesting guy. Pete, what are your thoughts on the wide receiver position and some of the guys that Ian mentioned?
Yeah, it's a really, really tough position this week. The guy who stands out to me the most for sure at the top is Tyreek Hill. Going against Tennessee, that's a great matchup. He's cheaper than Julio and Michael Thomas by a good bit on DraftKings, and I think this is a spot where we can see Ty Freaks. So he's probably my favorite high-end receiver. I mentioned Decker up front. I think Rashard Matthews is another interesting one. Robert Woods, to me, is a guy that I definitely want some exposure to. And then it gets a little tricky in terms of just pricing for some of these players. If you look to like the Saints, I think Ted Ginn will probably garner a decent bit of ownership in tournaments. I don't mind that call. A little narrative with the revenge against Carolina. People kind of know what to expect from him. He's not going to get a ton of volume. On the Jacksonville side, Marquise Lee is a big injury to monitor. If he does miss, obviously I'd be really high on someone like Dede Westbrook and Cole potentially. But I kind of assume he's going to play. And Ian, did I miss something earlier? When I was looking at stuff earlier, he was still questionable. Do we have any news on him?
No updates this week, but the general kind of word the last few weeks where they were holding him out with the idea that he could be ready for this game. So we'll see what he does at practice tomorrow, but look at him.
Yeah, and I think he would be a good play too. I mean, that's another kind of pivot potentially away from Fournette, who I do love a lot in cash. Mohamed Sanu, kind of the same philosophy here. If you want to get away from Julio, who's really expensive, and go to someone like Sanu, I don't hate that either. But it really is a challenging week because these receivers are expensive, and we want to jam in the running backs. So you're going to be playing the likes of Eric Decker or Rashard Matthews.
Right.
I don't know. There's going to be a lot of trash receivers that are going to be in line.
Yeah, for sure. Ian, I want your thoughts. Over the last couple of weeks, I think I messaged you on Monday morning over the last month asking about what your thoughts are with Olsen returning. He has sort of become Cam's number one guy. And, we've talked about it before in some of our content, but is this like a real fake trade? Is it real that Olsen is Cam's number one guy with Devin Funchess and Kelvin Benjamin gone? Like, we have a 3 or 4 game sample with Funchess and Olsen in and Kelvin off, and it seems that Olsen seems to be his preferred guy.
That's what I'm seeing too, man. I mean, it was briefly like we had a week or two where Olsen really wasn't that involved and he was getting back. But really these last 3 weeks, it's been absolutely clear that Olsen is that number one guy. And I mean, even when Benjamin was there, Olsen has always still been Cam's guy. He's had at least 5 targets in every playoff game of his career. And I mean, at this point, and we were talking earlier about Cam with this, he's had a lot of historical success against the Saints. Totally different defense this year, but really Olsen's had a lot of that same success. He's had over 15 DraftKings points in 4 of his last 6 appearances against the Saints. And kind of looking at their defense, it does make sense that they'd be more, vulnerable to a pass-catching tight end. Kenny Vaccaro's out for the season. He's maybe a guy that could have had a little more success there, but, all this Marshawn Lattimore talk, he's a baller, but he won't be on Olsen. He'll be stuck on Funchess. So if we can get a guy that maybe has a better chance at actually taking advantage of the defense's weaknesses, and he's also number one option on his offense, I mean, seems pretty ideal to me.
Interesting. All right, let's keep on moving here. Let's talk about some conventional stacks. Pete, is the most conventional stack Goff to Gurley?
Sorry, a little mute there. Yeah, I mean, I think that'll be pretty popular. Gurley's going to be chalk, so that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think Alex Smith to Tyreek Hill will gain some momentum throughout the week. I think those are some pretty chalky options. Maybe Cam Newton to Olsen will end up being chalky as well. But I think it's going to be pretty spread out. So I don't mind a lot of these different options. I think that nothing is going to be like super, super heavy chalk, with the exception of maybe Goff and Gurley, who could just end up being a lot of cash games for people. So, yeah, it's an interesting week. I definitely love Goff to Gurley. Those are what I think are the highest expected players at their position. But, another stack that I really, really like is Fournette and the Jags defense. That's a stack that I'm really, really high on this week. We can talk more about pivots here in a second. Ian, do you have any other thoughts on what might be chalk?
Yeah, wouldn't be surprised if maybe people just keep pounding these Saints running backs, especially given the success they've had against Carolina this season. I mean, Panthers really good run defense overall, but they've allowed 79 rushing yards per game against everyone in the league, and then 148 in 2 games against the Panthers. So, we've talked about Kamara and Ingram all season, but I mean, the Saints offensive line just really dominated all season. Number 2 in adjusted line yards. I think if Taron Armstead, their left tackle, is out again, that obviously changes things. But I think maybe potentially having those Saints running backs at home, balling out all season against a defense that people have seen get gashed by them before could be a popular option.
Is it viable, Pete, to play both of them? We talked about this earlier in the year. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, especially on a short slate. Yeah, I mean, if the Saints just roll and, they obviously are going to probably put the pedal to the metal for a little bit longer than they might normally, I think those two could absolutely be two of the highest scoring running backs on the slate. It's a little less viable than other weeks because we do have so many stud running backs, and the Panthers' run defense is good. But like Ian said, they both had success versus Carolina. So yeah, I don't hate it, especially if you're going to run back like the Saints' defense in that spot.
Yeah. Kamara went for a little over 29 DK points against Carolina in their most recent meeting, and Ingram went for a little over 25. So definitely a good spot for both of them. All right, let's talk about some non-conventional stacks or some contrarian stacks. Pete, is the obvious one Alex Smith to Travis Kelce?
I think that's a really good one. I think Kelce will be low owned. I really like Drew Brees to Michael Thomas as well. Drew Brees, Kamara, Michael Thomas, run it back with Olsen and then find value. I think that's kind of a nice grouping there. People probably won't play Mariota at all if you want to go for ownership strictly. Him to Eric Decker and Rashard Matthews and run it back with like Kelce or Tyreek, that's going to be super low owned. The issue is I don't think anyone's put up points in Arrowhead in a long, long time, and certainly wouldn't expect that to change. But if you're just going to go strictly ownership, that's one way to do it. Another ownership one would be to play Tyrod at 4,700. No chance I can pull that. I could be convinced to do Mariota, but I'm not going to roll any Buffalo guys going into Jacksonville.
Yeah, that's so tough. But the problem with Mariota, he just has not flashed a ceiling this year. His max is 20 points,
He hasn't flashed the ceiling, and he's going into Arrowhead where it's been extremely tough for offenses to play. The only argument for him is that, Kansas City's obviously gotten burned by some big plays. So it's a tough spot to find something that's really contrarian with those cheap guys. Matt Ryan, Sanu might make a lot of sense. Going away from Fournette with a Bortles stack, Bortles, Marquise Lee, Bortles, D.D. Westbrook, I could see that being viable. But yeah, my favorite ones are definitely like Alex Smith to Kelce, Rees to Michael Thomas. I think those are really nice stacks.
Yeah, Ian, I'm curious your thoughts on the Atlanta guys because he mentioned Sanu. That's a guy that I'm targeting for sure as a contrarian option. We saw last week, and I do think Week 17 was valuable, especially for the Falcons, because we saw they needed to win. So we saw what a playoff system would look like, and they really just all the targets to Julio and Sanu. It was clear that Ryan was zoned in on him, and Sanu was clearly right there with Julio as far as target share goes. So what are your thoughts on him as a value guy?
I don't hate Sanu. I'm just a little bit concerned. I mean, and as a contrarian option, absolutely, you kind of know what you're getting there, but I'm just I think we've seen what his upside is, and his upside is the dude can't get over 100 yards. I think his touchdown total might be a little bit inflated this year. I mean, he's converted 5 of his 7 targets inside the 10-yard line to touchdowns. I mean, Julio's got 1 for 11 with that ratio. I don't think we're about to call Sanu that much better of a contested ball receiver than Julio. So I don't know. I'm okay with it, but I just think, if we have I don't know, Sanu this week going with 2 healthy running backs, I mean, there's a chance that he could be a number 3 or 4 option even in the passing game. One other contrarian, I'm not sure how contrarian it is, but Pete mentioned Tyreek Hill. I think it's important to also realize how we have some roles changing in the playoffs. I mean, Tyreek should be back there for every kick and punt for the first time since his rookie season. So having that dude with an extra 3 to 4 touches per game, saw he had 3 carries last year in the playoffs against the Steelers. So if we can get a wide receiver 1, RB2, and kick returner, punt returner 1 situation, I don't see why we can't stack Tyreek with that Chiefs defense that hasn't allowed over 30 points in Arrowhead since 2015. So, yeah.
Yeah, good point there.
Love that call, obviously.
Yeah. All right, Pete, let's get a little crazy. So one thing that was standing out to me that I was looking just ways to be contrarian. Last week in week 17, only 8.9% of users used a tight end in their flex, which means that they use 2 tight ends. It seems like this week, like you would have to be borderline crazy to use 2 tight ends, which means that you might want to do that in tournaments. I mean, you got to get a little bit crazy. But like, what are your thoughts on that strategy? It seems like no one's going to do that. And if you did like a Cam Olsen stack and then put Kelsey in your flex, it seems like that would be a pretty unique lineup.
All right. I think I love where your head's at, and I'm going to give you a couple things. First off, make sure you put the right guy in the flex. And I know you're not thinking like initially you wouldn't do that with your build.
The timing, yeah.
Yeah, you want to make sure you get the right tight end in the flex. But I actually think it'll be somewhat popular this week given how tough it is, especially on DraftKings, to make a lineup. So I don't think it'll be as I think it'll still be pretty unlikely, but I do think this week in particular makes a ton of sense. So I love the call. I could see people going 2 cheap tight ends to fit in 2 stud running backs and get balance in their lineup. But, yeah, I love that call. I think it makes a lot of sense. And the contrarian one for sure is to go, something like Olsen and Kelsey. Just make sure you get Olsen in your flex there.
Yeah. I wasn't looking at the timing of the game.
I know.
That's a good point. That's a good point, though. No, it is good to say because people don't think about that for sure.
Yeah, and I really I've been such a donkey this whole year, Brian. You've been on the game in a big way. But the big thing that I just want to emphasize again: make sure you're making your lineups, especially this week, with the right person in the flex, and take advantage of late swap. It's a huge edge on a playoff week like this.
Yeah, like if you put LaShawn McCoy in your lineup, he should absolutely be in your flex spot. I think that's definitely a good point. Speaking of Shady, is he a contrarian option? I mean, what are our expectations for him, Ian?
I don't know, man. Just having this that he's going to be limited, and for his entire game to kind of be built on having this next level agility and kind of ankle breaking ability. If we're sucking that out of him, I don't know, man. And, you talked about it in your piece a little bit earlier this week, but, I mean, this Jaguars run defense has been pretty damn good ever since they got Marcel Darius going in week 9. I know Pete swore against going with Tyrod, but I do think it's a little bit of a contrarian option. I mean, and we can get to that in prop bets later, but I might take Tyrod over Mariota this week, just based on the fact that if Shady is limited, Tyrod's going to need to be that guy that basically runs the ball for them and carries the offense. He's averaged 50 rushing yards and 0.6 rushing touchdowns in games that Shady's missed since 2015. And, we do have Charles Clay there who's had 8+ targets in 3 straight games and would be that featured red zone target if Shady's out. How many times will the Bills make the red zone against the Jaguars is definitely a very good question. But, I mean, as far as a low-owned, cheaper stack goes, I think maybe if Shady isn't able to play, taking advantage of some of his athletic teammates is a potential way to go.
All right. I think we're running out of time here, but I definitely want to give Ian and Pete a chance to give any bold calls. I mean, we're in the playoffs, so if you have any bold calls, who do you think like a dog might win? The more that we talk about this Buffalo offense, it is unclear to me how they're going to score. So if you don't think they're going to score at all, the under might seem like a pretty good bet, or Jacksonville might win by more than 8.5 points. So that seems like an interesting game. But Pete, any major bold calls, interesting things from a DFS perspective or a real life perspective that's standing out to you this week?
Yeah, I'll make a bold call DFS-wise. In terms of bold calls in real life, no conviction. I think the lines are efficient, and you're seeing big favorites for all the home teams here, which makes sense. In terms of a bold DFS call, I'll say Michael Thomas is the highest scoring player on the slate. Michael Thomas has a great matchup here. Looked good. The hamstring, obviously, it's another week to get healthy. Last game there on Sunday, and Carolina has definitely been susceptible to getting burned by the receiver. They'll probably really focus on shutting down Kamara and Ingram, and I just think Thomas will have a huge game. So I love him for GPP. And a bold call would be him being the highest scoring player on the slate.
I like it. Ian, you feel like being bold about anything?
Yeah, I'm also picking a wide receiver as the highest scoring on the slate, but I'll take Tyreek Hill. A lot of the reasons I said before, I think he's definitely due for one of those kick return, punt returns. And, I mean, he's facing this Titans defense that has really funneled production to the air all season. LaShawn Sims, one of their starting cornerbacks, he was put on IR about 2 weeks ago. Logan Ryan was hobbling around last week with an ankle injury. So, I mean, hey, give me Tyreek Hill versus Adoree Jackson for 60 snaps a game, and let's see if he can keep him, outside the end zone. I'd love to see it.
I like it. I'll give a bold call. I think the Rams are going to rout the Falcons, just like destroy them. Double digits, whatever I have to do to make it bold. Two touchdowns, whatever. That would be my bold call. All right. Any last words, fellas?
No, great work getting through the regular season. Shout out to both you guys for doing a phenomenal job. Bryan obviously done a great job with all the content. Some really good pieces came out during the holidays. It's a big-time grind. And Ian and Adam, I mean, the amount of work these guys did on the news and projections this year, people don't understand how much work goes into that. So big shout-out to you guys. It's nice with the playoff slates, less work, but we're certainly grinding as hard as we can to get them good. So big-time shout-out to both you guys, and just appreciate all the work you guys did.
Yeah, and shout out to Friedman, too, who is not feeling well tonight. I think it's because he lives in the middle of nowhere where there's like 4 feet of snow. So
yeah, always shout out to Friedman for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Go ahead.
Yeah, real quick. We got a third member of our news team, Justin Bailey, that also worked hard this year, and he deserves a shout out. But yeah, man, 17-week grind. Playoffs are here, so hopefully, I don't know. Last year was a little disappointing in some of the games we got, so hoping it's just a fun few weeks here.
Yeah, I didn't mean to leave out Justin. Shout out to Justin for sure. That's a huge part, and yeah, we're very, very blessed to have you guys.
Yep. Looks like a fun weekend. I mean, we have some pretty good games on the docket, so hopefully they end up actually being pretty good. But a fun DFS slate, I think, nonetheless. All right, we will end it there. Thank you guys for listening and watching as always. Good luck in this wildcard weekend, and we'll talk to you guys next weekend.